Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa with insights into Africa's ever-changing business landscape. I'm Hannah Viviers in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, where it's 9 p.m. It's 2 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and 2 a.m. in Beijing. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome. First, let's take a look at the markets. Well, it was not a good day for global markets as this global sell-off driven by fears of the coronavirus economic impact took center stage. However, looking at the moves made in trade today, the changes were nothing to write home about. A quick look at some of the indices we track here. The S&P 500 was slightly lower, virtually flat on the negative side. The FTSE 100 did see a dip of just over 1%, but that was more due to the Bank of England leaving rates unchanged and the uncertainty around Brexit, which finally happens tomorrow, rather than the economic fears around the coronavirus. Here on the continent, the JSE All-Share actually ended in positive territory, although it was also virtually flat. Egypt's index was up just over 1%, while Kenya's NSE was down ever so slightly. But coronavirus is a major global concern, and we're getting into that in just a moment. For now, more stories making headlines. The death toll of victims of coronavirus is on the rise, forcing the WHO into a crisis meeting on the epidemic. MTN Uganda questions government directive to list at the local bourse. And Britain is just hours away from leaving the EU, but businesses now face an uncertain future. Well, the death toll continues to rise from the coronavirus. It now stands at 170 people, all within China. More than 100 have recovered. The total number of confirmed cases globally jumped to over 8,200 nearly, all in China. More than half of them are in the epicenter, Wuhan, the capital of Hubei province. 80,000 people are under medical observation, and there are 83 cases outside China. The Philippines, Finland, and India have confirmed their first cases. Thailand has 14, Japan has 11, and Singapore has 10, with a handful of cases in countries like Malaysia, Australia, France, and the United States. Meanwhile, a World Health Organization panel is meeting in Geneva to determine whether the coronavirus constitutes an international public health emergency. Last week, the WHO Emergency Committee met for 2 days. However, the officials stopped short of calling a global health emergency, citing that more information was needed about the virus. A WHO declaration is reserved for the worst outbreaks. It has only been used 5 times by the UN health body, including for Ebola and for swine flu. Well, for more on that story, Rebecca Bundan joining us live from Geneva, where the WHO meeting is underway. Rebecca, what is expected to come out of this emergency meeting? And thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca.
The WHO has reconvened its emergency committee to look at the merits of declaring this a global health emergency. So far, it avoided doing that, and it was actually met with some criticism because of that decision. But now it's decided to reconvene this emergency committee. These discussions are going on because of the rise in the number of cases of the coronavirus, and also because of the WHO's concerns about the human-to-human transmission that we've seen outside of Europe. All this means that it needs to reconsider this decision and look at whether it should be declared a global health emergency. We're expecting that decision today. We know that these discussions seem to be going on for longer than expected. There was meant to be a press conference very shortly. We've just heard that that's been delayed by 1 hour. So it seems that there are very, very intensive discussions that are continuing on this matter as to whether it should be declared a global health emergency.
Rebecca, I suppose one of the questions that people would be asking right now, watching this across the globe, and that it's been making headlines pretty much every day, people might be asking why the wait and the delay until now, and why so much discussion when it does seem to be quite a crisis at the moment?
Absolutely. There has been some criticism of the WHO because of that decision so far. And And that's partly because of the fact that the number of global cases that we've seen of coronavirus have been somewhat limited when you compare it to the number of cases that are there in China. So that's been one of the factors behind that decision. We know that there was a lot of debate in the previous meetings where the emergency committee discussed this matter, that there were some experts who thought it should be declared an international emergency and others that thought it didn't, and it came to that decision in the end. But now they're looking at this again, and they'll come to another decision on whether at this point in time it should be declared an international emergency. We'll also look at various recommendations on how to manage the coronavirus situation, and those details will also be revealed to the public.
Thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca Bowden, joining us there live from Geneva. Well, there are fears that Africa's travel industry could be impacted by the coronavirus outbreak. Over the years, the continent has become increasingly reliant on the growing numbers of Chinese visitors. CGTN's Yasser Kim now explores some of the ramifications the virus outbreak could have on Egypt's tourism industry and economy.
Mu'taz Sidqi is head of one of the largest tourism companies in Egypt. He works extensively with the Chinese market. He says the coronavirus has been a blow to the tourism industry.
Chinese market is one of the very important markets to Egypt. It's considered among the top 10 producing markets to Egypt, and we receive almost around 5 flights every day. Since the 29th of January, according to the coronavirus, we're receiving the ban of flights to come to Egypt, and this affected the flow of business to Egypt badly.
So far, 30,000 reservations have been cancelled from China, and more expected on a daily basis. The Tourism Chamber had announced that 24 companies that work with the Chinese market are set to lose $15 million because of these cancellations. The tourism industry has just been recovering from the political fallout of 2 uprisings and threats of terrorism. It has posted record revenues in 2019. But now there are fears that the coronavirus could be an unwarranted setback. Egypt has been an attractive destination for China. The number of Chinese tourists to Egypt have more than doubled in the last 3 years. But Sidqi says the sector has become equipped to deal with unexpected events like this one.
I believe 20% of the companies have really affected, but now they are working hard to compensate these losses. There is always alternative markets that we are seeking for, and especially Europeans are increasing and other markets. The Egyptian market has to think of new destinations and ideas to offer it to the China market. Once we are sure that this coronavirus will be more and more limited.
For now, the remaining Chinese tourists are expected to leave Egypt end of the week. No date has been set for the resumption of flights from China. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The coronavirus outbreak is posing a huge economic threat, not just to China, but in Africa as well. In Nigeria, several traders travel to China to buy goods, while thousands of Chinese citizens live and work in the country. Economic exchange between the countries accounts for over $85 billion in trade volume, and as Kelechi Mekalam reports, that may change as the coronavirus continues to spread.
Chinedu Chiazo is a known importer of fabrics in the popular Wuse market in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. He's been in the business for over 2 decades. He's been able to grow his business from a startup of less than $100. Now he purchases goods worth over $30,000 from China and makes an average 5 trips yearly. But that would change now following the outbreak of the coronavirus.
When you are alive and healthy, that you can do investments. But then, for those of us that our business for now depends in China, it's going to be much setback. It's going to affect trade for this year.
There are several businesses like Chinedu's here that are largely dependent on imports and trade from China. So many would be seeking alternatives.
It is better this time to send money across, so that they can load the goods for you, especially if you have good and competent hands over there. But if you don't have, like I said, the most important thing is to be alive. So you cannot risk it.
Currently, China accounts for 15% of the global GDP, with many more countries depending on its thriving market. Many fear that the coronavirus outbreak would cause fatalities as well as impact negatively on the world economy if quick, effective interventions are not implemented to contain the virus. China is Nigeria's closest ally and most important trading partner. Trade volume between both countries run into billions of dollars, so Nigeria may be one of the worst hit.
What you experience is that for Nigeria, in bringing of goods from foreign countries, particularly those of us dealing with Chinese economy and being partners with China, we have a lot of challenges. More so that some of those goods, there is no immediate competitiveness or competition or alternative from which we can get them. So you might see increase in prices because so many persons may be demanding for goods because supply side may reduce while demand remains the same or increase.
Many here are now urging global leaders to work with China to conquer the menace of the coronavirus in order to save lives and economies from crumbling. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, it's time now for your corporate headlines. Massmart Holdings is pushing for a complete overhaul of its operations in South Africa. The move comes amid an expected full-year loss of over $95 million. In the year ending December 2019, Massmart expects to report headline loss per share of between 342.9 cents and 384.5 cents. The JSE-listed company attributes the decline to tough trading conditions in Africa's most industrialized economy. Well, Nairobi, based on demand delivery platform Sendi, has raised $20 million in a Series B investment round led by Atlantica Ventures. Toyota Tsusho Corporation, a trade and investment arm of Japanese automotive company Toyota, also joined the round. Sendi currently has offices across Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. It's among a host of African startups seeking to harness technology to overcome challenges for African businesses. Social networking giant Facebook has recorded its first annual fall in profits in at least 5 years. In the last 3 months of 2019, Facebook says its revenue rose by 25% to about $21 billion. During the period, the Silicon Valley-based firm's full-year costs and expenses also rose by 51% to stand at around $47 billion. Facebook shares closed at $223 on Wednesday before falling into the $208 range in extended trade. And Boeing has posted its first annual loss in more than 2 decades. The American plane maker closed out the fourth quarter of 2019 with $17.9 billion in revenue. That's a 37% decline compared to 2018. The losses stem from the continued worldwide grounding of Boeing's MAX jets and a production hold this year in the wake of 2 fatal crashes. And those were your company headlines. Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. When we return, here's more news that's making headlines in the world of business. MTN Uganda questions government directive to list at the local bourse. And South African Airways now suspends local flights to cut its running costs.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get action on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Well, Ugandan government move requiring foreign-owned telecom firms to list in the local bourse may fail to achieve its goal of boosting Ugandan ownership in the sector. This is according to MTN Uganda's chief executive, Wim Vanalupiti. MTN Uganda is the country's largest telecommunications firm. It's a local unit of South Africa's MTN group and boasts some 13 million voice subscribers. MTN chiefly competes with the local unit of India's Bharti Airtel. Instead of the listing requirement, the government has been urged to allow foreign firms to sell stakes to vetted local investors via private placements. The government plans to issue all telecom firms with new operating licenses by June under a new regime. Well, for more on that story, we're now joined by CGTN's Leon Sayanga, who is in Kampala. Leon, thank you so much for joining us. Let's just start with what we're hearing about MTN's resistance to listing on the USE. Could you tell us if you're hearing more from what other telcos in that sector are saying in Uganda?
Well, it's very interesting that the silence can literally be heard from all the other telecommunication companies. But yeah, except for MTN, who have come out to sound the drums on this particular move. Definitely, there's quite a lot that is running behind the curtains on why and when this particular listing should be up for the telecommunication companies. But when again does it start and come from? It comes from the directive by the Uganda Communications Commission to have other telecommunications companies with the new regime, like you said earlier, with it coming through this year into 2020, that to register as national telecommunication operators, they will have to list at least 20% of their shares. So it's not the kind of thing that the telecommunication companies would want to be part of, but they still can find themselves between a rock and a hard place at this point in time.
Leon, but why wouldn't they want to be part of it? I mean, we do know that historically and even currently the USE hasn't been able to attract as many companies, I suppose, they would like to on the local bourse. But what are some of the benefits that the government might be saying to the telcos, saying, well, look, there are benefits for you being listed here?
Well, let me start with the world. A little bit of the limitations as to why companies are not listing up with the IPOs here, because Uganda only has approximately 18 entities on its securities exchange. That, of course, is a very small number given the number of businesses that are lined up within this country. Now, to try and attract the telecommunication companies, there certainly must be incentives. And therein, the government is fronting one particular, one major incentive, which, of course, is the shared infrastructure which will come with the fiber optics when they are listed. Of course, that could come as a bigger leverage for them. The other, of course, comes in with exemption on particular taxes and fair share prices, maybe short and long term. But those are the little bit of the things that are coming through for the telecommunication companies. On the other side, there could be a little bit of the cons to look through, or probably why the telecommunication companies are hesitant to be part of this kind of project, which of course comes with limitations on foreign exchange, given the fact that Uganda in itself is having inconsistencies with its currency against the dollar, and several other cons coming through. So it is a situation of give and take, or even still, it is government's way at this point in time.
So what MTN has said, it's arguing that a better way to increase ownership in the telcos, which is essentially what the Ugandan government is trying to do, they're saying that a better way to do that would be rather to go the private placement route. Now, is that something the government is considering, or are they saying, well, we have had, because there are reports that this discussion that MTN has been giving this for a couple of years before this announcement was made. But is the government looking at that, or are they saying, come June, we are going into this new regime and we're not going back and we're not even considering this private placement route?
Well, the decision by the government to try and push the telecommunication companies that way has probably come a little late for MTN per se. MTN themselves had initially tried to move for private partnerships with the National Social Security Fund, which came through as one of the major entities therein, and there were discussions going through until they fell through. Now, of course, something has been put on table for the telecommunication company MTN, and they find it a very difficult one. Now, is it a government decision? Will they be able to change their stance? It is something that we can't quite tell at this point in time. Discussions still are going on, and we very well know that the president of the country, Uganda, President Yoweri Museveni, has insisted, and very much so says that MTN should try and enlist at least the shares on the security exchange. So it is going to be a back and forth situation, I believe. But even still, with the deadline coming mid this year, June 30th, and the 2-year plan in which the telecommunication companies have to at least enlist, it is going to be a one-way traffic, and that should be the government's way.
Thank you so much, Leon. We're sure you're going to be keeping a tap on that for us, and we'll be getting those updates from you. Leon Sianga joining us live from Kampala. Well, South Africa's embattled state carrier has cancelled a dozen of local and international flights for February. The decision has been reached out to cut costs and conserve cash. The affected South African Airways flights include those departing and landing in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Durban, East London, Windhoek, and Nairobi, Kenya. The airline says it will accommodate all affected customers on alternative flights. The announcement comes 2 days after the carrier secured $244 million from the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Apart from the DBSA loan, SAA has also received bridging loans from commercial creditors. The carrier has not made a profit since 2011. Well, the economic growth outlook for African countries in 2020 is a mixed bag, but generally optimistic, with growth expectations ranging from 0.8% in South Africa to South Sudan, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ethiopia. Angela Coppola explores the key themes that are likely to dominate economic growth.
Climate change will hit African countries the hardest, and it's one of the key themes that will drive or limit growth.
Through a business lens, the question is, how does business step up and contribute to this change? Of course, there's business opportunity from a technological perspective, green technology, renewable energy, etc. That's sort of mitigating the effects. But really, how do we, as the political economy and business, step up here to really, to seek real, effective change for what is a long-term crisis that's growing?
Finding growth outside of a business's home market is becoming increasingly important, and it's not a bad thing, strategically speaking. It's also leveraging the so-called new scramble for Africa and finding opportunities in the free trade area. There's one key challenge facing businesses looking to expand their offering, though.
To the extent that the continent is quite balkanized, information, for example, on data cannot be moved between countries. One of the consequences of that is that if you can't move data between your subsidiaries, you can't do effective anti-money laundering work, just by way of example. If you can't move data between countries, you can't set up cloud. If you balkanize cloud, you actually don't reduce risk, you increase it because your data sets are smaller.
Retail consumer brand business leaders are continuously looking at adding value to their customers and investors, which means looking for new markets. But there are challenges in different countries.
I think it's country specific, but so if I can call out Ethiopia, it's a constraint on Forex. In some of the other markets, it's the regulatory uncertainty creating tax leakages and tax constraints for us, as well as for consumers. But overall, we're very positive and gung-ho about the continent, developing our own talent, and then try and bring them into, so the Kenyans can go back to Kenya and Uganda can go back to Uganda, and then run their business for us in our portfolio.
Most African economies offer opportunities to their counterparts on the continent and other countries looking to get involved here because of those great growth rates and opportunities. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt are yet to reach an agreement over the operation of a dam that Ethiopia is constructing on the River Nile. The three countries have been meeting in Washington, D.C. for several days to try and finalize an agreement. CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa.
For the past 3 days, lawyers, experts, ministers from Sudan, Egypt and Ethiopia have been having talks in Washington, D.C. The U.S. government and the World Bank are attending as observers. They are seeking to create a legal framework on the filling and operation of the 6,000 megawatts Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam that Ethiopia began constructing on the River Nile in 2011. Earlier this month, they agreed that filling of the dam reservoirs be done between July and August, Ethiopia's rainy season. Their current discussions are being guided by a draft that was produced in the Sudanese capital Khartoum about a week ago when technical experts from the three countries met. It entails issues like the water filling stages of the dam, water retention in the dam, operation of the water reservoirs, and how to manage drought conditions. The dam will reduce floods in Sudan, but Egypt remains concerned that the operation of the dam will severely affect the flow of water downstream to its territory. If they fail to agree, they will invoke external mediation. This is according to a declaration of principles that the three countries signed in 2015. Ethiopia has already expressed interest in having an African mediator if it gets to that stage. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. Here's what you can expect when we return. Britain is just hours away from leaving the EU, but businesses now face an uncertain future. And Google makes it to the trillion-dollar group of companies.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
Business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
British businesses say a lack of information about what happens after Brexit is keeping them from planning for the future. Business leaders say they can't make big decisions without more clarity. The government plans to reach a deal with the EU by the end of this year, but still many are skeptical. CGTN's Juliet Mann reports.
The frames are welded by expert braziers. The finished product is assembled by hand. This London factory rolls out 50,000 fold-up bikes a year. Special editions like the new electric model have been good for business, helping sales and profits ride higher.
Undoubtedly, the biggest market for e-bikes is Europe. So for us, it's very important that we are successful in Germany, Netherlands, France, Spain, Belgium, all the major markets. We wouldn't want, a disruption to the supply chain.
Brompton Bicycles planned early to avoid getting in a spin. Contingencies included stockpiling £1 million worth of bike parts and steel components. And the firm is stepping up a gear.
Brompton has set the wheels in motion for battery-aided bikes like these to make up half the business in the next decade. The goal is to double production in the next 5 years, if Brexit doesn't get in the way.
As the UK opens the door on a new wave of global trade negotiations, businesses puzzle what it means for products, services and people.
I really worry for us and any hospitality business that needs cleaners, where we're going to find the people who want to do those jobs if we don't have talent coming from outside of the UK.
The government has warned there will not be future alignment with EU rules. For firms like short-let accommodation service under the doormat, that could erode opportunities in the UK over time.
It's just not good enough. It's not good enough that there aren't plans. It's not good enough that we're exiting without clarity of what this means for businesses. As we expand to other markets, we don't know what that regulation is going to look like. We don't know whether we're going to have to set up different legal entities, how that's all going to play out.
The UK government says a future trading relationship with the EU will be settled by the end of 2020. But businesses don't want a free wheel to the end of the year. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
Well, let's return to Brexit. Concerns are looming over the potential disruption of supply chains as uncertainty lingers over the divorce deal. Additional checks and paperwork will be required for goods coming into Britain if it can't reach a deal with the European Union. For a country where 50% of food is imported, any slowdown could cause huge problems. Our reporter Song Yaozhang has that story.
Deliveries come and go at all hours here at Natura's South London depot. The fresh fruit and vegetable company supplies high-end restaurants and sells groceries through its own shops. It relies on an international supply chain and tight deadlines.
If products take longer to transit or if there is added bureaucracy in terms of moving product across, because we're dealing with an incredibly fresh product where every hour counts, it is worrying in that respect.
The company says it's already seeing a decline in sales to restaurants, which it links to consumer uncertainty over Brexit, while much of Natura's workforce is from the EU and concerned for their futures.
UK was part of Europe, so being part of Europe was my home as much as Italy. Since Brexit, I don't know if I can call it home, and just that makes me uncertain and not safe.
Given that the pound is also worth less than it was before the Brexit vote, the company says job applications from EU workers have dropped by 2/3 in the last year alone. British companies from supermarkets to car makers are preparing to stockpile. That's as they consider possible transit chaos at the border following Britain's former departure from the European Union 2 months later. British group Premier Foods has said it plans to stockpile to protect against a risk of delays at ports. Britain's biggest retailer, supermarket giant Tesco, said it could begin stockpiling tinned goods from this month. Away from the food industry, Britain's key car-making and pharmaceutical sectors have said they are also looking at possible stockpiling. Song Yaotian, CGTN.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has officially signed a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. This marks an end to the 1994 North America Free Trade Agreement. CGTN's Jerry Rittenberg has more from Washington.
On the campaign trail, then candidate Donald Trump threatened to tear up NAFTA. He called the North American Free Trade Agreement, signed with Canada and Mexico under then-President Bill Clinton, one of the worst deals ever. But once in the White House, Team Trump chose to renegotiate the deal instead, to, as some say, modernize its terms. On Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump signed the revised version into law.
Everybody said this was a deal that could not be done. Too complicated, too big, couldn't be done, we got it done.
For its part, Mexico ratified the agreement in December, even though new language could mean fewer U.S. automakers will make their cars south of the border, and more American jobs will stay in America. Last but not least, Canada's House of Commons on Wednesday began debating the final text. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who negotiated the deal when he had a majority government, but now leads a minority one, promised not to rush the process.
Millions of Canadians depend on stable, reliable trade with our largest trading partners, from farmers in Alberta and auto workers in Windsor to aluminum producers in Saguenay and entrepreneurs in St. John's or in Vancouver.
Canada agreed to open up its dairy industry to the U.S., but insisted on keeping Chapter 19 in place, the dispute resolution mechanism, and it got it. Mary Scott Greenwood served as Chief of Staff to the U.S. Ambassador to Canada under the Clinton administration.
The United States thinks it can throw its weight around and people will do a deal because of the size of the marketplace. A country like Canada says we need to be able to abide by the rules and have everybody abide by the rules because we're not the biggest player in the room.
It could be weeks before Ottawa ratifies the deal, but that's not stopping Washington from taking a victory lap, in particular Trump.
He's definitely basking in the glow of this achievement, but there's a lot of good news to go around.
Indeed, in the U.S., both Republicans and Democrats will tout this as a win in what's a crucial election year. Trump, of course, has also tackled trade across both the Pacific and the Atlantic, withdrawing from some multilateral deals while pursuing new bilateral ones.
This trade agreement, the USMCA, is a necessary precursor to every other trade agreement that comes, because the whole world watches what the U.S. does, and if the U.S. couldn't get it over the goal line with Canada, who could they get it done with?
Rowie Rettenberg, CGTN in Washington.
Well, this month, Google became the 4th company in history to join the $1 trillion club. That occurred as it reached a market capitalization of $1 trillion. The elite group includes 3 other U.S. tech giants, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft. And as CGTN's Giles Gibson reports, China's Alibaba is expected to become a member of that club one day.
This is the place we start.
Alibaba is Asia's most valuable company, currently worth around $500 billion. Some Wall Street analysts believe it has the potential to break into the $1 trillion club.
They are not just the biggest player in their space, they're also entering physical world retail aggressively. They've entered payment systems aggressively. And they have a really strong global brand, perhaps the strongest global brand of all the Chinese tech companies. And so I don't see any reason why they won't continue on their hypergrowth path.
To match e-commerce giant Amazon, Alibaba would need to roughly double its current value from $500 billion to $1 trillion. With its market cap hovering around the $600 billion mark, Facebook is another company tipped to join the $1 trillion club. But like other US tech giants, it's facing antitrust investigations at the federal and state level. Antitrust regulations are designed to stop one company becoming too dominant in a particular sector. Democratic presidential contender Elizabeth Warren is one step ahead of the investigators, already calling for regulators to break up Facebook and other tech giants.
Because that opportunity to do what you do best, to come up with a great idea, to work your heart out to make it happen, to be able to compete on a level playing field, is taken away by these platform giants. So my view is break those things apart and we will have a much more competitive, robust market in America.
Warren is on the left wing of the Democratic Party, but there's bipartisan support for investigations into the business models of big tech firms. So regulators might not break up these $1 trillion companies, but they're almost certainly facing tighter regulations and bigger tax bills. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
The Ethiopian government says it has finished all preparations in order to tackle any probable outbreak of the coronavirus. Ethiopia Airlines has just tweeted that it has not cancelled its flights to mainland China. CGTN's Guillaume Charla has more from Addis Ababa.
Since the news of the spread of the killer coronavirus was heard, many countries, including Ethiopia, were preparing for any possible outbreak. In Ethiopia at the moment, 4 people are under quarantine as they were suspected of contracting the disease. Ethiopia's Public Health Institute says the test results so far show negative.
We have isolated the 4 suspected people of the coronavirus after all the World Health Organization criteria are fulfilled. And we have made tests and the results on the 5 types of the coronavirus is negative.
Addis Ababa's Bole International Airport is currently undertaking serious heat test works on every passenger that enters the country. And passengers from China are part of this procedure. However, the State Minister for Health, Leah Tadessa, said there are no plans of stopping flights to or from China.
About 1,500 passengers enter Ethiopia from China daily. However, we don't have that much passengers from Wuhan at the moment as the city itself is on a lockdown. We understand when people raise the issue of closing flights from China, but there are no such plans at the moment. We are part of our international regulations, and for this to happen, we can't just stop flights, and besides, we believe this is not a solution at all. The virus does not come from China only.
It is Ethiopia's Ministry of Health which is generally coordinating the effort of guarding Ethiopia from the coronavirus entry or spread in the country. But things are being done in a multi-sectoral national task force.
This work is not confined under the Ministry of Health only. All sector offices as well as other bodies are on board. On the one hand, the Ethiopian Public Health Institute is handling technical works on the ground. On the other side, the National Task Force formed oversees general works of tackling the coronavirus.
Apart from individual country efforts, the African Union, through the Africa Centers for Disease Control, is coordinating continental efforts in order to fight any coronavirus spread. Grumjala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, Rebecca Bundan joins us live again from Geneva, where the WHO meeting is underway. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us again. Do we have any updates on what is going on at the meeting?
We're still awaiting the outcome of the meeting, the emergency committee meeting that was called by the WHO to see whether the coronavirus situation should be declared an international health emergency. These discussions still seem to be going on. Presumably they're very, very intense, because we were actually expecting an announcement a short while ago and a press conference to be held, but that's now been postponed by an hour. That will come up in just over half an hour from now, so that's when we are expecting the decision. We really don't know what the outcome of this is going to be. We know that last time the opinions of the experts on the emergency committee were actually very divided. There were some that thought that it should be declared an international health emergency at that point, some that didn't, and certainly some commentators criticized the WHO at that point for so far not having it declared it an international health emergency. But the WHO Director General yesterday was saying that although the number of cases outside of China seem to be quite limited, it's deeply concerning the fact that there are these cases of human-to-human transmission of the virus outside of China, and that there could be the potential for further outbreak, and that's why it's reconvened its emergency committee to look at this. There will also be recommendations on how to manage the virus that will come out of this, and those will also be made public, so we should have more information soon.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Rebecca Bundan joining us live from Geneva. Well, Africa's first drone academy has opened in Malawi, where students are learning how to make and fly drones, collect and analyze data. The institute builds on the work of a pilot scheme with the support of the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, in which drones have been used to deliver medical supplies, monitor crops, and map cholera outbreaks. CGTN's Terry Wangari has more.
For Ethiopian aeronautical engineer Lydia Elias, building and piloting a drone to support humanitarian and development projects on the continent of her birth has been a lifelong dream. Now, as a student of Africa's first drone academy, she's about to make it a reality.
After me learning, I try to teach my people. I also have an aerospace club, so I'm trying to transfer this knowledge to the students that are fellows in my country.
The institute is in Malawi and builds on the work of a pilot scheme launched in 2017 with the support of the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF. The scheme uses drones to deliver medical supplies, monitor crops, and map cholera outbreaks. As they become smaller, more reliable, and more affordable, their role in such projects becomes certain to increase on a continent prone to natural disasters and dotted with isolated communities. Lydia and 25 others from across Africa are the first batch of students at the academy. They're learning how to make and fly drones, collect and analyze data over a 12-week course.
For short time that I've been in here, I've been able to create this drone because this drone is the drone which I made from my own ends through the use of provided aided materials. We provided all these materials and how to go about. Then I followed all the procedures until I make this drone.
Well, this is a very significant step to help young people obtain 21st century skills. This decade, which has just started, is going to be digital. And to help young people improve their skills, learn about digital technology, learn about drones, will be an incredible step forward, not only for Malawi, but for many other African countries as well.
The Academy plans to train 150 students to build and pilot drones by 2021. Funding from UNICEF partners has paid tuition to the first cohort of 26 students. It's expected that by 2022, the Academy will run a tuition-free 2-year master's degree program in drone technology. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, a quick look at the commodities now, and as is generally the trend when there's global market uncertainty, gold does tend to see some gains. Today was no different. Gold was up slightly in trade at almost 0.2%. The commodity that took quite a hit today was Brent crude that shed 1.6%. Analysts pointing to the coronavirus outbreak yet again as a challenge oil markets are currently facing, primarily due to that risk in demand for oil. And that was a wrap-up of your commodity prices. And now let's just take a look at more news that's making headlines. Nigeria alcohol consumers opt for local brews at the face of tough economic times.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. In a bid to cope with the harsh economic climate, people in Nigeria have turned to traditional brew to ease their sorrows. Burukutu, as it's commonly known, is a brew that has its roots with the Jukun people of central and north Nigeria. It has now gained popularity among Nigerian youth across the country. And with yo-yoing inflation and rising prices in mass-produced alcoholic beverages, who can blame them? CGTN's Terry Wangari has more.
Many Nigerians gather here along the banks of the Benue River in central Nigeria to enjoy burukutu. The vinegary alcoholic beverage has been made here for generations from the fermented grains of sorghum and millet and consumed as a traditional alternative to beer. Now, as Nigeria's economy struggles to grow, the local brew is enjoying a boom from clients looking for a cheaper option.
If you put burukutu and beer, I'll go burukutu because burukutu is less hazardous than the beer in whatever condition that is brewed. That is one, it is cheap, but it is not a drink for the poor. You get the point? That is where the mixture is. It's just, like a calabash is not as compared to the bottle of beer.
Even though it's still early in the day, These makeshift pubs are already filled with drinkers, young and old, male and female. Women ladle the brownish liquid out of large clay pots into dry calabashes for customers to drink alone or in a group. Burukutu typically varies in strength from around 4 to 10% alcohol. Typically, burukutu is consumed by all stratas of society and serves as an important focal point for social gatherings.
I'd rather go with a beer that at least I have an idea about the production method and at least the hygienic nature to some extent. So I think I'll go with bottled beer instead of burukutu.
But those partaking say that as Nigeria's economy limps along, more people in this rural area are turning to it instead of the more expensive mass-produced beers.
My choice is culture. And the reason why I'm taking culture, number one, again, I want to cut costs. The economic is bad for now. I cannot just go outside and start living above my means.
Nigeria's economy is still struggling to shake off its hangover after emerging from its deepest recession in decades in 2017. The government is predicting that growth will reach nearly 3% in 2020. But that is still well below earlier levels, and poverty rates are increasing as population numbers surge. So while the country's economy recovers, people in Nigeria will be soothing their souls and their pockets with burukutu. Terry Wangare, CGTN.
Well, let's take a look at how the Forex market fared today. The South African rand closed strong, ending the day at 14 rand and 74 cents to the dollar, up 0.8%. The Kenyan shilling lost some of yesterday's gains. It was down 0.2%, while the Egyptian pound saw a modest uptick, closing very slightly in the positive. And that was your Forex market. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business. Remember, you can send your feedback to contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. From me, Hannah Viviers, and the rest of the Global Biz team, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.